Alright, this is really the fun part now. I'm putting a coat of stain, first coat of stain on. I'm looking at this. This is when all your imperfections will come out. And I'm looking at right here. There's the only wormholes I couldn't thoroughly get out. But I'm not done yet. They're right there. I think what I'm going to do is to, after I get it stained, just before I put the first coat of finish on it, I'm going to mix up just a little tiny bit of clear epoxy. Maybe I'll just put a drop of color in it and just put a daub right on the spot, the two spots where the little wormhole is, and let it dry, and then sand it off right flush with the wood. That's another reason I like using this alcohol stain. If in the course of putting the stain on, you find a spot that you really missed, you can just sand it right down, sand it right off, restain it. You'll never see it. I like to, you can see how much stain I've got on there. I put on as much as it will take. If you get it too dark, you can always just go over and wash it with clear alcohol, and that will lighten it up. And also, I rub it vigorously with steel wool after each coat of stain I put on. Now, what I figure happens is when you rub it back, and I'll show you that when I do it, you rub it down, the dark stripe is like end grain, that sucks the stain in more. So if you rub it down, you rub it all back, you rub the hard part, the hardwood, the light stripe, you bring that back, almost back to as white as it was before the stain went on, and you stain it again, you rub it back again. Every time you stain it, the stripe goes darker, but the light stripe, you bring back lighter every time. And that's when you can get really the most out of your piece of wood. But that's a pretty nice piece of wood. This whole gun stock is. For all my kits, I use the very best wood I could find. It's kind of crazy to skimp on your wood. Now this is the other side to that. You can see the stripe, but it's nothing like it will be once the stain is on. So give that a good soaking. I always say anybody that I'm showing this technique to, say if the stain's not running off your elbow, you're not putting enough on. You can't go wrong with this thing. You can't put too much on. And I like to get it as wet as I can so that it'll really sink in, get into that stripe. Those inlays are glued in, and the glue is probably just overkill. The finish, you put the finish on over the wood, it will seep in behind those inlays and seal, and actually it glues them right in. When I do silver wire and inlays around the silver wire and all the little tiny stuff, I don't glue them in. Anytime you're working with glue on your wood, you want to make sure you get it all off the outside of the wood, because if you don't, it'll show up when you put the stain on, and then you end up with a white mark somewhere. As you can see, there's no white marks around those inlays. Now if that should happen, you can take a scraper and just scrape the wood, or a piece of sandpaper, and sand through. The glue usually lays pretty much on the top. It does sink in a little bit, but if you get it off the top, and if there was a piece in here that had glue showing on it, I'd let the whole thing dry. Then I would take a scraper and I would scrape where the glue is, and then resand it, hit it with the steel wool, and then just go over it and restain it. But that is a sweetheart of a piece of wood. You can see the carving has come out rather nice, and I think that little hunter star, I think it's just enough to take the plainness off of that, off the cheek piece. And the wood is beautiful when it's wet. It really looks good. I'll be rubbing it down and putting a couple more coats of stain on it and rub it in between, but we'll have a look at that as we go. Now we have a first coat of stain on the whole rifle, and I've rubbed this front panel, side panel down already, and I'm going to rub the whole stock with 4/0 steel wool. And I said a coat of stain. It's not really a coat. This is an alcohol-based stain. It's more of a leather dye than a stain. But so I'm hesitant to call it a coat. It doesn't really coat anything. It just colors the wood, and it also helps to raise the grain. So I'm going to give the whole thing a good scrubbing with the 4/0 steel wool. This can stand a lot of rubbing, and I'm putting quite a lot of pressure on this, as you can see. And at this point, I'm not really worried about the corners, these sharp corners. Any additional coats, or there I'm saying coats again, applications of the stain, I would be more careful on the corners. But I know we're going to restain this at least once more, but probably twice more, and rub it back vigorously. So if we expose the bare wood right on the corners, it's not really going to make that much difference. Even though this panel is not actually attached to the barrels, it's still, that bottom side that has the V-groove in it is holding it steady, because they're so vulnerable at this point. That little tab on the end here goes underneath the nose cap, so that holds it there, and then this V-groove on the back holds it right in the bottom here. So you can just take this and slide that in under there, and that holds it quite nicely. And you can see we've got this nice and flush with the nose cap, and that's about all we need to do with that. But if you feel this now, oh boy, that is super smooth, and that's exactly what we want. In this area down here, it's the same thing. You want to be careful on your edges that you don't have a little sliver of wood sticking up. So try to, if you get to an area where you think there might be a little sliver, just go with the grain in the direction the grain is going. Now you can see how that's lightening up there. You see the light stripe is really coming back almost to where it was before we stained it. And the stripe, because it's more open grain, is sucking up that stain more and is staying darker. And this 4/0 steel wool, it will cut those corners off a little bit, but not enough to worry about too much. Just use a little common sense on it. I put my fingernail down into that little edge that's right here, and then for the carving itself, I like to take a toothbrush and give that a good scrubbing. But I always tell my students, this is a very important part when you're doing this. Probably the most important part is when you're scrubbing this out with a toothbrush. Be sure you don't use your own toothbrush. Use your wife's toothbrush or your partner's toothbrush, because it'll taste like hell when you brush your teeth. Everybody gets a kick out of that. That's still taking off a bit of wood, even though I give that a very, very fine sanding. And that's why I like to do the steel wool. And if I get to the fine part on the carving, again, I'll take the toothbrush and give that a good scrubbing. What happens is the 4/0 steel wool comes apart, and it gets a lot of little tiny particles laying on top. And when you put the toothbrush on it, the toothbrush picks them up, and it kind of helps the toothbrush do some of those spots that are way under. You can do the center of this design with the steel wool, but be very careful on those leaves. You can see the steel wool that's laying on there. Little particles, and they'll help to get into that. And you can just kind of follow the carving around with the toothbrush. Well, I'm getting ready to put on the second application of the stain on the side panels, and I would just thought I would take the time here to show you that this wood is matched on both sides of the rifle. See if I can match that up. There. I don't know if you can see that in the video or not, but that stripe goes right through both pieces. And the way I do that is when I cut the side panels, and I cut them out of a piece of maple like this, I cut the V groove in the back when they're still together. And you can see, of course, the stripe runs across both pieces exactly. Then I put it in the bandsaw, and I cut it right down on that little fine edge that's there, and I split them in two. And then I mark, this would be the breech end, the other end I mark muzzle end, so that I don't swap them by mistake. Not many people are going to notice that on one side of the barrel or the other, but it's just something that's very easy to do to match it up, and it's just I think it's kind of nice to do that. But I just thought I would mention that. All right, this will be the second application of the stain, and we're going to do the side panels here. And this is what I use. There's no magic formula or anything. I just sometimes I've made this myself with just denatured alcohol and either powdered color that you can get from Woodcraft, or you can go down to your local paint supply store and get some universal color. You bring little container, little jars, and you get an ounce of this and an ounce of that if you're trying to mix up a special color. Sometimes if you're repairing an old stock, and you're trying to, or somebody else's stock or a different color, you can use the different colors to mix and match. And I haven't found one yet that I couldn't match by doing it that way. But for this project, we're going to use the Birchwood Casey, and it's a walnut stain, and I use this right straight, just the way it comes a bottle. It will appear quite dark when you do it. If it's too dark for you, you can just take a rag with soaked in alcohol and wash it afterwards. But the beauty of the alcohol stain, the way I like it, is it strikes right into the wood. And after you get through rubbing it down, there's really nothing left on the surface. It's just the wood is dyed, so it doesn't cloud it. Okay, ready for the application. Now I use this little paintbrush, and I'm using it only because I normally use those little applicators. You can get them through muzzleloader supply. It's just a little wire with a ball of fuzz on the end of it, and it holds a lot more stain than a paintbrush does. I like to stain both sides. I stain inside the lock mortises and all that. I know a lot of the old timers didn't do it, but I do it, and just because I like it all the same. And even the backside, now you really don't have to restain the backside, but I'm going to. And I'm using the barrels themselves to hold the side panel steady, and I'm not really worried about getting any stain on the barrels, because I haven't started to work on the barrels yet. After we get the wood all stained up and get a coat of sealant on it, I'm going to have to start working on the metal. And all the metal is going to have to be either filed down if it's really rough, wherever it is rough, and emery papered until it gets good and clean. But myself, I like them dark. Gives it more of an old look. Most of your old antique guns are quite dark in color. You see there's little puddles on there. I'm not worried about that. It will all even itself out. When you rub it down, it takes anything. It'll absorb everything it's going to absorb into it in the first couple of minutes. You can almost see this stuff drying in. You see down this end how it's flattened down already, so that and up here you can see those puddles. But I just lift it, let them run down, let them sink in wherever they will. Okay, that one is all coated, and you can see how the second coat has struck into the stripe. The dark stripe is getting darker, but the light stripe really isn't any darker than it was the first time. And if we rub this down, and if we did this several times, which I do on occasion, the dark stripe would get darker and the light would get lighter. But every piece of wood is different, so I really don't have a standard. But the look of this right now, I'm kind of liking that color. And this may be the last application of stain that I put on this particular project. Now on this rifle, if you remember, we glass bedded the lower thimble in to give more strength to this area. You can see with that groove, the loading stick groove in the back, and the one in the front, really the only amount of wood is right around the thimble itself. Now the outside here, this is going to be a little side tutorial. If you see right here, those are wormholes. I have worked my butt off around this. There's another one right there. Trying to work around those, I laid out, there's one right there. I've laid out the main stock was the same way, so I laid the pattern on it to try to get in between the wormholes, and I got between most of them. A few of them was still there, and I tried to lay it out so that when I took the major wood off the rough stock, that I'd eliminate them, and I did eliminate 90% of them. And then what was left, I had to work around it, and where the carving was in this rifle, there were several, and I worked the carving in around, I made the design around the holes so that the low part of the carving would be where the holes were and where they would come off. Now I was hoping that I would get down below the surface, the bottom of those holes, but as you can see, they're quite evident. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stain this up. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to take a needle drill, and I'm going to drill a little tiny hole down into those wormholes and make them actually a little deeper. They won't be any bigger on the surface, but they'll be deeper, something that the epoxy can get a bite into. And then I'll put the epoxy on it, and I'll video doing all that. Then once that sets up and it's hard, then I'm going to take and I'm going to file it off so that it's flush with the surface of the wood, sand it off, and finish it. And although it may not be completely out of sight, it's going to look considerably better than what we're looking at right there now. So that'll be kind of a fun thing to do. I like doing stuff like that. It's a bit of a challenge. I'm going to wait until I've finished all the staining on this before I fill those holes, as I want to see what the color it is. And even though you use the same exact stain on two different rifles, they never come out the same. The natural color of the wood always has a bearing on what the finished color is going to be, no matter what you put on them. Alright, we've got the side panels all stained. Now we'll put the stain on the second application of stain on the buttstock itself. So we'll just start right up front here. I'm always looking forward to doing this down around where the carvings are, because it just makes the carvings come to life. No need of going into that mortise again where the tang goes. You want it to sink in and go as deep, and that alcohol, of course, is so thin that it will sink in deep. Actually, the metal, if you got any stain on it, just give it a little wash with alcohol, it comes right off, as long as there's no seal on it. I just like to keep going over this for a couple of times until I can see that it's not going to absorb anymore. On occasion, I've done it so much that it's actually when it dried, it actually had a film on the top. But if it does, you just steel wool will take it right off, or you can wash it with the alcohol. But there it is, and that carving looks like it come out pretty good. All right, we're gonna do that little repair on those wormholes. I've scraped them out with this back end of this is a numbered drill. This is number 80. It's really a tiny, tiny drill. And I noticed when I started digging on them, there's dust in the bottom of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this little needle drill, number 80 numbered drill, and I'm going to drill a hole in both ends of the little channel that's there, and give it something for it's going to be like a pin going down in, only it's going to be epoxy. And I'm going to let the epoxy build up over the top of the hole. Then when it dries, we'll cut it off and try to get it somewhere close to the color, but it's certainly going to look better than what's there. I've mixed up this epoxy, and I put just a little bit of color, and it's almost no color in there. If I hold the container up, you see when I put it on the side of the cup, you can see through it, so it's still opaque. And I put a little on this piece of wood, and you can see that it's still a little bit opaque. Now if I match this color up to the color that's on the gun, on the wood itself, the color on the stock is a little deeper. Now I could put just a tad of lamp black in that to bring it in, and it'll take that I don't know what you want to call that. It's kind of it's not a natural color. So I think I'm going to do that. Just add just a touch of lamp black. Right now I've got burnt umber and lamp black in it. So I'll just put another drop of, not even a drop. Okay, we've done about all we can do now except the last coat of stain. So this is going to be the last application. And then I'm going to hang it up overnight and let it dry thoroughly. And tomorrow morning, first thing, we'll rub it all down one last time with steel wool and apply the sealant. I always look forward to that. And as you can see, our little wormholes have pretty much disappeared. Alright, I think it's time. Now I'm going to take the buttstock off and stain the inside part where the swivel plate is. And that'll be the last of the staining. I'm going to restain the whole thing and hang this up for the night too. And then tomorrow we'll do the rest of it. It's looking pretty good. Waiting for drying time on some of that stain, I made a new patch box door for it, and I just put a little carving on it, and just take the plainness off it. And there's going to be a little silver wire around it, and I think that'll look quite good. But I'll get the finish on this tomorrow too. All right, now we're going to just put that little open end wrench on that nut that's in there. and just wind this off. Now we take that right out. Take the nut and washers off. Put that right there. Now I can stain. You can see the stain has run in there already. Stained some of it, but I want to stain everything inside there and give everything a coat. Be ready to put the finish on tomorrow. When we put the finish on, it really makes a difference. I've stained the inside of the mortise where the swivel plate goes. So now I've got it all ready to put the final coat of stain on it. And I found the best way to hold these is to just take a coat hanger, put it in where the tang goes, and I bend it just enough that there's a little spring on it so that it can't come out. That makes a good way, and I can hang that up right over by my heater. So that's what I'm going to do. I did a little silver wire work when you weren't looking. I didn't want to turn this into a silver wire tutorial, and I didn't want to really turn it into a carving tutorial. I spent more time on that than I really wanted to. The first job in the cleaning is going to be to clean the barrels, but they're not really all that bad. So we take off the rear swivel plate, and that's the locking pin. We want to make sure, put that somewhere, don't get lost. And this plate here, it's easy to clean the barrels with that off. And there's the rear swivel plate. All these will have to be cleaned too before they go back on. There. Now I can get a good paper on here and clean the sides down. Now when you do this, again, you want to have some really good sharp paper. I'm using this 220 grit for the first part of it, and it's wet dry sandpaper. I use it dry, but it can be used wet, and it probably cuts a little bit better when it's wet. I just put it on a stick like this. I have a piece of leather on one side, gives it a little cushioning, and I just wrap that around it that way. Then I can get on both sides here, and it's just like draw filing. And if you've got good paper, it doesn't take an awful lot of time. I've got the two large flats on both sides done, and for the middle groove in here, I just take a good square piece of wood, and I use coarser paper on that because you're not going to see it in there. I just like to get it reasonably clean, and if there's any little chunks of lead from the soldering the barrels together, or if there's any roughness, just takes it off pretty darn quick. When you get to the sanding, get good paper, get real good paper, and when you're doing the sides of the barrels, change it often. Just what I do is I just unwrap it, one fold it in back, and I get a new sheet, and I keep using good paper. I don't wait till it's totally worn out that you couldn't use it for anything else. I switch it when it's still good and sharp, and it cuts your time down, way down. And the cost of the paper is nothing compared to the cost of your time. You can see the advantage of having a nice nice bench here, and you can just turn it from end to end if you want to work down on this end. Set that any place you want it. You don't have to stretch out and reach for it. The idea is to make it as easy as possible. Doing it the easy way is hard enough. That's mostly just to take those bumps off and get it good and clean so that the briny will take on it very well. And turn it over and do the groove on this side, and then I'll start on the individual flats. One other thing worth mentioning, now that I flip this barrel over, I see there is a little excess lead back in here, and that comes off very, very easily. Just take a regular wood chisel, and this is just like the other day when I said, don't use your own chisel, borrow your buddy's chisel, because it certainly doesn't help them. But anyway, you just lay it in here, and you can see that lead just peeling out. And that's all it takes, just like that, and it takes that extra lead out. It just makes it a little neater. And then you put your block in and sand it, and that'll make it even smoother. And once you get through with your chisel taking that extra lead off, you can put your block right in there, and that will smooth it out really nice for you. Now we can get to the single individual flats, but I thought it would be good to show you that you can clamp this right into your vise, right on the at that diagonal. These flat, because it's an octagon. You can just hook it right in that way, and that puts your flat right on the top, so you can work right on the top. And of course, when you get that one done, you can put it straight up, and then on the other side you can put it so it tips the other way. But your work is always right up here in front of you, which is always a big help. Yeah, I got those all done now with the 220, and now I'm going to switch to 320. And 220 isn't too bad, but I'm just going to go a little bit more. Some people go up to 400 or 500 or 600. I don't. The 320 is plenty, and if you've done a good job with the 220, this is a breeze. This doesn't take any time at all. And if you notice, even on this, here's my light. I've got my light right here. I've got my work right up here at my face, and I'm looking down. I even put my glasses on, and I'm looking for those scratches in the barrel. And when you see one, just keep on it until it's gone. Well, of course, now there's no scratches because I've taken them all out. But when you do it with the first paper, you will see some scratches on it. Now comes the real fun part. This is the part I really look forward to, is putting the finish on. It's you get so much for so little effort. When you put that finish on, that stripe just jumps out at you, and all your efforts of getting rid of the scratches and the carving, everything you do, it just comes to life when you put that coat of finish on it. So I put the last application of stain on this yesterday, left it overnight, and I rubbed it down very, very lightly with steel wool. And you feel this is just, it's just ever so smooth. It feels like a piece of glass. And I've got these side panels are all smoothed down. And you can see that's just a gorgeous piece of wood. So what I use for the finish is permanent sealant. Now there's a lot of finishes on the market that are every bit as good, maybe even better. Jim Chambers makes one that works very well. True Oil is another one. I've used the permanent seal just about exclusively for the last 20 years or so, and I'm very, very happy with it. I've got it on a number of my guns. It stood up very well, and at any point, if you get a scratch or a mark on your rifle, you can just put a little drop on with your finger and just rub it in for 10 minutes like that until it comes almost dry, and you're good to go again. This is the sealer here. Now, they make this in sealer and they make a finish. The only difference is the viscosity. I like the sealer better for guns that have a lot of carving on it, as this one does, because this is so thin that it strikes in very good, and after you get through wiping it with your hands, you can take the toothbrush and just wipe out your carving and take the puddles out so you don't lose the definition of your carving. But I'm going to use a little bigger brush because I do the same thing with the sealer that I do with the stain. I just slop it on. The more you get on there, as I said with the stain, if it's not running off your elbow, you're not putting on enough. So I'm going to put this in a little better container for dipping that brush in. I'm just using a very soft brush here. I put a rubber glove on my left hand to try to protect this, but my right hand, I like to rub this in. I've tried it with a rubber glove on. It just doesn't work. You rub it with your hand, it really smooths it out, and it just kind of polishes or burnishes it, but it's something that you can't get with your rubber gloves. And it gives you hangnails and stuff like that. It dries the skin up, raises hell with your hands, but that's something I can live with. Anyway, I'm going to start right out on the very inside the area where the swivel action goes, and you can see how that dries in so quickly. Just saturate it. This is literally running off my elbow here. The more that goes on there, the more you know it's striking in. And I like to get it in every screw hole. And on a regular long rifle, I pour some right down the loading stick hole. And the trigger goes in here, just swab it right in there. Now that is saturated, but you'll see how fast that strikes in. If you've got a good dry piece of wood, it's like a blotter. And you can see up here how it's already dried in. I just keep wetting it. I do the tang hole for the first coat. I try to keep it off it for the second and succeeding coats, but there's no way you can, which means probably have to scrape that out before the tang will go back in there. And then we put it on here. You can see how that just absolutely comes to life. The butt area, I feel, is very, very important. And you can just see that drying in. I hope let that seep in for a bit and I'll come back to it. You can see it looks like I'm making a mess here, but this will all strike right in. You can see up here how it's already struck in. I'm going to come back on that because I try to keep this wet for at least 10 minutes inside the patch box. I just puddle it right in there. You can see it dry, striking into the stripe, which shows you that's all end grain, open grain, I should say. I don't mind the seal getting in where the toe plate is going because I like that to come up just a little bit so that it's easier to clean. If you get it down below the surface of the wood or flush with the surface and you put the finish on, it will be too hard to clean. When you clean the silver, it will take the finish off the rifle. You can see how it's striking in there. Just re-wet it. Now see, this side is already dried in. Can't put too much on, but this will strike in like this for, I would say 10 minutes. I'm going to hang that up for a few minutes, and then I'm going to come back and rub it with my hand while we're letting that strike in. And I do both sides of the side panel the same way. Just soak it right to it. You can see the wood up in here, it's so thin. On the loading stick side, the loading stick comes down in and actually breaks through into the lock mortise. This strikes in so good that this is all you need. If you're putting in any tiny little inlays, which I do quite a bit of, I don't glue them in. I make a press fit on them, and then let the sealer strike in. Once the sealer gets in, sinks in behind them, it's just like glue. Now on this coat that I'm doing here, I don't worry about drips or runs, because every bit of this is going to sink into the wood. After you get about the third coat on, that's when you got to start worrying about drips. Now we've got the patch box door. When I pick the wood for the patch boxes, I try to line up the stripe, because you can't get a perfect match on them. But if you slide the patch box up and down on the stock, you can see the stripes, and sometimes you can get pretty darn close. I like to get inside that spring area. Seal that all up good. When I always get these fit a little too tight when I fit them. I try to make them loose, but there's something inside me that just doesn't let me make a loose patch box, and then I always end up having to take a 3-cornered file to the edge or on the rifle itself. And you can see that is pretty much all dried in. Now I just rub this with my hand, and that's it. She's stained. I would say that's a nice antique look to it. And the person I'm building this for said he wanted a rifle that would look very early. Now I'm going to hang this up over by my heater. And let that dry for 24 hours. Now, at the end of the day, you'll pick this up and it will be, you feel it, it will feel dry. But if you don't let it really dry and cure, when you put the next coat on, it actually dissolves what you've done. So you just, all you're doing is re-wetting it. So you want to let it dry for 24 hours in a good drying place. But again, I put it beside my heater, but not too close. If you get too much heat, you're very liable to crack the stock in the front panel. And these panels, when you're working on them, you always want to lay them on something good to work on because they're so fragile. Once they're on the rifle, there's no problem, but until you get it on the rifle itself, there it is. Now, if I didn't want that rifle that dark, I wouldn't have. I actually stained that rifle 4 times and rubbed it back in between with steel wool. And if I didn't want it dark like that, I wouldn't have stained it that last time. I would have just rubbed it back. And if you find that you get it too dark, you can take some denatured alcohol and wipe it over with the alcohol. This piece in here, I stained an extra time to make it a little extra dark. I don't think that will be noticeable that it's darker than the rest because there's some wide stripe there. But that was because we had those little wormholes in here, and we fixed them, but you can't see them. Quite happy with that. Now we just have to let it dry, and you can see we had that soaking. It was running off of it, and that has absorbed pretty much all of it. I usually put on anywhere from 6 to 9 coats of the sealer. If you use the finish, you can do it in about half as many coats. And that's what I would recommend if you don't have any carving on your rifle. Use the finish, you just save a bit of time, but this rifle has a finish. Now I'm not going to bother to wipe out the carving, but when I put on the subsequent coats and it starts to build up some finish, then I would just take the toothbrush and just go in it and rub it back and forth like that, and it takes it out of all the little holes and crevices that you don't want filled up. I don't mind a little getting in there on the first 2 coats, but after that, you want to get it out, or you lose the definition of your carving that you work so hard to get. Now, while all this is setting up and drying, I cleaned the barrels last night. I've got a vise here, and I'm going to engrave my name on the top and get that all ready for browning. One other thing that's worth mentioning is this makes your hands real sticky, and it's certainly not good for your hands. What I use is that Fast Orange cleaner, and there's lanolin in it, so as soon as I get through, I just give my hands a good coat of this and wipe them off with paper towel, and that helps a lot to keep the fingers from drying out. But if you don't do that, your hands will be sticky all day. And put the sealer back in the can and close it up tight, because it does go bad. Well, I got it done. Anyway, I just use the regular graver that they used 200 years ago, and I don't use an engraving hammer. I have a nice one here, but I just don't. I taught myself to engrave, and this is what I use for, and I've used it ever since. All right, as long as I've got these barrels off, I might as well show you how to pull your plugs if it's ever necessary. These are just these plugs actually are stainless steel, and to get them off, you just put your wrench on. That's a 7/16 nut on there, and other way. Just give it a hit. These plugs are actually stainless steel, so they're never going to rust in there, and they go right in, and that bottom edge, you can see the little mark that's on it. That actually goes right up against the bore. Perfect tight fit. There's no way you can get them any tighter. And the thread itself is just a little bit oversized the bore. And when Green Mountain made these barrels for me, they recommended it's an oddball size thread. I think it's 11/16 20 thread. But it's I originally designed it myself for a 5/8 18, but they said this would be a much stronger thread, and that's what I want to use. I also put a little not Loctite, but Never Sees on them. You can see that's what's getting all over my hands when I put them together. I think it's a good idea. But you just put these on. As I said, that's a 7/16 wrench. They should never seize in there because they are stainless steel. And I just, those are tight. That's right up against there's a little step inside there, and that plug goes right up against it. And the touch hole will be in 1/8 of an inch ahead of the plugs, so you shouldn't have any trouble with that. Now, the way your swivel itself is put on, this part here, which is the barrel side of the swivel, those nuts just fit inside the end of that swivel. And this can go either way. These screws are also stainless steel. And I put just a little bit of Never Sees on those also. So they should never be a problem to get out. And this is the part of the swivel that goes on the stock side. And I just take a little white lithium grease, and I just put a little dab on that with my finger when I put the rifle together for the last time. And that goes on there. And you can see they fit very, very tight. With that grease on there, you can't just pull it off. You've got to twist it to get it off. But they're really machined nicely. And that's all there is to it, to get your swivel action off for when you're getting ready to do your browning or or engrave. I'm going to do a bit of engraving down here on the on the swivel part of it. I've already done this little design around the edge here, and then the ink there is just some of my scribbling. I don't draw it out perfectly. I just kind of lay it out in the graver will actually do a nicer drawing than the pen will. We've given our first coat of permanent sealer 24 hours to dry, and you can see it's nice and dry. Feels nice and smooth. There's no need to rub this down on this coat with steel wool because it is so smooth. And you can see how nice the patch box lid is too. It's all flat because it's all sucked right into the wood, and that's a good thing for sure. So we're going to go and saturate it just the way we did the last time, but you'll find that it won't strike in as much, and we won't use near as much sealer. We've actually used, I would say, over half that container. Most of it has sunk right in out of sight, but we'll start again right up front. But you can see that even now it's still striking in. That's a good thing. Now, I mentioned when we put the first coat on that if you didn't have a lot of carving on the stock, you could use the finish instead of the sealer. I mean, if you use the finish for the finish coat, you should use the sealer for at least the first two coats, because you can see how this strikes into the wood, and that's what you want. You want it to penetrate deeply. The deeper the better. But you see, I'm still putting on quite a bit. I still want a good coat of this on, and I will go back and look it over and make sure any places that it's striking in quickly, I will redo. The carving is popping out nicely. You can see up in here it's end grain. Of course, it's striking right in. Let it suck up as much of this as possible. The more that it sucks in, the deeper it goes. But you see, even now, you put that on there, and it just strikes right in. And that's what will give you that long-lasting, water repellent, moisture proof. On this coat, I'm going to just wait a few minutes and watch it to see where it's striking in, and I'll touch it up a little bit if it does. And then I'm just going to rub it until it's almost dry. You can see it drying in right along here. I like to make sure inside the lock mortise is sealed really, really good. But you can see I'm not really worried about the drips and runs. I just keep putting it on. Now I'm just going to rub it with my hand, and that will that will move any excess sealer from if there's any little puddles and stuff. The wettest part, it'll move it over to a dry area. Now it only takes, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes of rubbing this with your hand until it's dry enough that it's not going to drip or run anywhere, and then we can hang it up again. There's no big rush to do this. Boy, that color of that stock is really popping out now. Beautiful. Very nice. You see how that silver wire pops right out now. When I put that wire in, I leave it just a little bit higher than the stock surface, and when you run your finger over, you can feel it. And you really have to do that so that when you get your last coat of finish on and it tarnishes, you can clean it. But I've left it little bit higher than it's going to be finished at, and I don't cut it back until I get the very last coat of sealer on, or the next to last coat, I should say. And when I've got just one more coat to go on, then I'll take a piece of very fine emery paper and just go over that silver just lightly. That will remove any sealer that's on the surface. And then when I put the final coat on, I rub this really good over that, and when that's dry, just a light rub with steel wool will clean that off, and then it'll be raised up just enough that you can clean it for the life of the rifle. What happens is when you're rubbing it like this, it'll start to feel sticky, but you know that it's starting to set up when you feel that. And if you don't rub it, if you just put a very, very thin coat on and leave it, it's very liable to drip and run. And the rubbing of it gives it that, well, I guess you'd call it a hand rub look, and that's exactly what we're doing. All the wood is pretty, but I think the curly maple or fiddleback maple is the prettiest of all. I rub this until I start to feel a drag. My fingers will be dragging on it, which means it's getting just a little bit beyond sticky. I do the same thing as far as cleaning the inlay here. Just before the last coat, I will also rub that down, and so that when it's after the last coat, there's only one coat to take off with the steel wool. Actually, that is in just about as deep as I wanted. I got a little deeper than I thought I did, so I won't cut that one down any deeper than it is. And that's just about it. You can see the quality of the finish there, and that is definitely a hand-rubbed finish. Beautiful. When I bend the wire, I make it so it a little spring in it, so that it hooks in there, and then it doesn't fall off on you. Now I'll hang that up over by my furnace, and we'll leave that for another 24 hours. In the meantime, we'll finish up the side panels. Side panels, I'm going to put another coat on the inside of the side panels, just to make sure that they that it really gets sealed up good. But that's, I think that's probably all it needs is the second coat on there. You can usually tell just by looking at it if it stops striking in, you know you've got as much inside the surface of the wood that that's enough. We'll do the same with these little inlays here, is to clean them just before the last coat of sealer goes on, and then I'll engrave them. This I'm just going to set over here and let it sit by itself for a few minutes while I coat the other one. It's funny, every piece of wood is different. You can tell by the hardness of them, but if you use the same exact stain on two separate pieces of wood, or that came from two different trees, they don't necessarily come out the same color. And when you're putting on your sealer, you'll notice that there's some of them, the finish doesn't strike in as quick, and it's the wood that is very, very hard that does that, not as open grain. But one of the things I read about quite often is when people get a crack or chip out in their gun stock, and I hear it all the time, they want to mix up some glue and sawdust from the wood. And that is never a fix. When you put the glue in the sawdust, or epoxy in sawdust, it seals the sawdust, and when you try to stain it, even if you color the epoxy, as we did on this repair that we did here, it's still, you can't change the color and you won't get that grain to it. But the way we did it here is that we stain the wood first and then mix up the epoxy so it was slightly opaque, so you can really see through it, and you pick up the color and the grain in the background. So that's why that works so well. And we'll do the patch box door, and then I'll go back and I'll rub those two side panels until they get dry. Again, I'm not too worried about the runs right now, but I'm saturate it, let it sink in for 5 or 10 minutes, and then rub it. I still get a lot of satisfaction when I get to this point on the guns. You work so long and you don't see too much happening, but when you get to the finish, it happens so quickly. You can't help but smile when you see that beautiful wood pop out. Never get tired of doing this. Now that's starting to drag a little on my hand. Starting to feel just a little bit sticky. Give it another minute or two, and that'll be enough. On this particular rifle, we glass bedded the lower thimble, which strengthened this area in here, but I also glass bedded the individual thimbles. Don't always do that, but when you make a very slim, delicate rifle, they're so slim. If you look in here, there's so little wood, from the bottom of that groove, that these can crack right up the middle. You see a lot of the antiques where they're cracked right up through the middle. Well, if you glass bed these two thimbles, it adds a tremendous amount of strength up in this area here. And when I glass bed them, I put that fiber in them so that that makes it very, very, very tough. Now we'll get the patch box door. Still striking in fast enough that we don't have to be too concerned about runs. But every time you add another coat, there's more chance. While I was waiting for the sealer on the gun stocks to dry, I've been working on cleaning the barrels, and thought I'd try some engraving, which I did. And I engraved this butt end, I cleaned the action so that I've got that part done now. And the gentleman that's going to own this rifle called me and said he'd like to have the barrels coned, so I'm going to do that right after I put a coat of another coat of sealer on the wood itself. While I'm waiting for that to dry, I'll cone the barrels and go to work on some of the other metal parts. Alright, we're going to put the third coat on the wood, and I'm not going to bore you to death with showing you all the rubbing, everything I do on it, but I'll just give you an idea of what you have to do. And you can see that that's all the finish we got left. We're going to put that whole can on that little stock. It's amazing. Now, as far as the stock is concerned, it's super smooth. There's no runs or anything, but from here on, you've got to start watching for the runs. And the only thing I'm going to touch with the steel wool is I'm just going to rub the star itself, and when you rub it, you can see how that sealer comes right off of it. And I don't rub it any more than just enough to get the sealer off of it. But I mean, at this point, you could give the whole thing a little light rubbing, but you want to be very careful on the corners. At this point, there's only 2 coats on it. The only other thing I'm going to rub the finish off the silver. When I had these in, I depend on the sealer to glue these in, and the corners were springing up. So I took some sealer and on a Q-tip, and I daubed inside the silver line, made a little puddle on it, and I left it there for several minutes, and it struck down into inside the design. And then when I put the first finish on the rest of it, it all dried in, but there was 2 coats, and now there's actually 3 coats inside that. But when we get all the stain on, it'll all be shining the same. But if you were wondering about that, that's the mystery. solved. I've been trying to get as much information out as possible without overdoing it, but I realize that some people have built miniguns and other people have not, so I have to make sure everybody that hasn't done anything like this before to show them that. So I apologize to the rest of you that could be bored to death, but well, from now on we don't put very much sealer on because it builds up so fast. And I've got to get my rubber glove on too. I'm going to start from the same place again. And that will be the last time that I'll really purposely soak that into there, because I don't want to get any buildup, because that end piece, the swivel piece, fits in there so snug that I don't want to have to go digging it out. And the same thing applies with the inside the lock mortise and the swivel mortise. Probably won't strike in at all on this coat. It should be pretty well sealed by now. And you don't want to really flood it on this time like we did before, because we know it's not going to sink in. A lot of end grain in there, so I like to get that sealed up good. By the time you get to the third coat, you know it's not going to strike in the way it did before. So from here on in, we've got to start watching for any runs that we might get. There's probably enough sealer underneath the butt plate, but I'd rather have more than enough, because you sit your gun butt down, especially on a hunting rifle, and you're in the woods, you sit the butt on the ground. I always sit it on my boot, but a lot of people would have a tendency to just put it right on the ground. The only place I can see it striking in now is right here on this very end grain where the carving is going, so I'll just daub that again. And I'm just going to give that a very quick rubbing. And then probably sit it aside for a couple of minutes. But this is the same thing we did yesterday. It's been drying for 24 hours, and now everything is going to be coming out pretty even now. There shouldn't be any dry spots, and should all have the same amount of sheen to it. And when this permanent sealer, or the finish, when you get the final coat on, it's a little too shiny for me. So what I do is I rub it down very, very lightly with steel wool, and then I rub it with pumice, and we'll video all that too. But now I'm just going to rub this for another 5 minutes or so, and then I'm going to do the side panels and the patch box door. And I don't think that there's any point in video and all that. All right, I'm putting another coat on the gun stock. Now the thing here, the only difference I'm going to do this time is I am going to rub it down very, very lightly with the steel wool. Not because there's any runs on it, but the gloss is getting up there, and the falling coat goes on much nicer if there's a little tooth to the surface, and the steel wool, it just roughs it up enough. It dulls the gloss down, actually, is all it does. But you have to be very, very careful not to go through on the corners. And you can see how that's dulled down, the difference here. And this is also taking the seal off the tips of that silver wire that's in there. That's about all it takes, right there, just like I did there. Then up around here, you have to really be careful, especially on the edges of the lock plate and the release plate. Just give it a very slight. The other thing it does too, if there's any dust that would land on it during the drying time, the steel wool would get rid of that. Now that's so smooth there now, and starting to look like something now. Now you can start to see that the stripes in the stock, I tried to line them up the best I could with the patch box door. It did a pretty good matching job on that. I'm going to rub the two side panels now, and then we'll put another coat on as we did before. Alright, we'll rub this down really good, dusted it off nicely, and we're going to put the third coat on, and from here on we've got to watch for the runs. Now that the stock is sealed up so tight that the finish will have a tendency to build up on the outside, and of course that's what we're trying to do. And so we're going to have to watch for the runs while it's drying. The only difference on this application and some of the others that we've done is we're not going to slop it on like we did before. We want to keep it as a much thinner application of sealant, and then we're going to have to rub it just like we did before. I'm not going to video the whole thing. I'm going to do exactly what I did before, and then just rub it down and let it dry. The only difference this time was that I did rub it with the steel wool to take that gloss off of it, and that's what we'll do each time until we have enough finish built up on there that we call it finished. Alright, I've done the panels, and I've done it pretty much the same way. I rubbed the panels down, dulled them down a bit, and I've got a coat on the whole thing now. What I'm going to do is take a Q-tip and just go in where the thimbles and sop some of that seal off the bottom of that so that the thimbles will go in without a big hassle. and especially this lower thimble, where that crack is down there, it has a tendency to want to puddle in there. But, I've got this pretty well done. I'm going to set this aside and let it just set for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll come back and rub it. Now the stock, I hung up just about 5 minutes ago. It should be ready to re-rub. And I'll show you the areas that you want to watch for. Now you see right in here, you can see there's a run coming down here, and it puddles down in that corner. So just, this rifle has been setting now for about 5 minutes. So all you have to do is take your finger and rub it and wipe that run out. You can see there's a couple of little runs right there. That's all it takes, just like that. If you could stand and hold on to it for half an hour, keep turning it around, you wouldn't have to do that. Now right here, you see there's some drips right in here. That's where they normally get. So just take your finger and smooth them off. Now if I didn't do that, and that dried, then you've got a real job to, you can get them off, you can sand them and rub them with the steel wool, but then you've always got the possibility of taking too much off. So it's worth the extra time to pick the stock up and put it under a light like I'm doing there and watch for those runs. And I've done this enough times, I know that the normal place to get the runs right off the bottom of these lobes, off the corners of any place there's a crevice that goes downhill, and you only have to watch it for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And the other thing that I do is in my carving, and that takes, there were some little puddles in there, and it just takes that off, and then I just take my finger and rub it on. Now it's pretty sticky right now, and so that means it's getting close to setting enough that you can hang it up. But you want to watch it for several minutes, and all the usual, the most likely places, like in the bottom of this that little step up right there, that's the normal place if you hang it up, that it puddles down in there. And then if you do get a puddle in there, it's very hard to get it off. You can do it, but it's just aggravation that you don't need. If you have a space heater, if it's winter time, you can go and just hold this over the heater and move it back and forth for 5 minutes, and that really sets it quickly. Or if it's the summertime, you can step out into the sunlight and just keep it horizontal for 10 or 15 minutes until it sets enough that it doesn't drip. Now I think that's set enough. You can feel it when it gets sticky. It feels terrible in your hands. But I will watch this for the next 15 minutes, even after I hang it up. All right, we've let about 15 minutes go by. This has been hanging up over there by itself, and I've checked it for runs, and sure enough, we've got a run on it right here, right at the end of the lock motors. It's very simple. Take it off just like that. Now, if I didn't do that, take a look at this 24 hours from now, and this one is the same way. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up or not, but it's right there. Now, if I didn't do that, and come back 24 hours from now, that would be a hard correction to make, right on the bottom of that lobe there, too. Those are the normal places that you would look for it. It's been hanging there, like I say, 15, maybe 20 minutes now. So the rest of it has set up pretty well, so I don't think we have to worry about it again. But I think it's very important to go back and do that to save yourself a lot of grief a little bit later. Now we're going to be working on the steel. I've Emery papered these barrels down so they're in pretty good shape right now. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run them over with my buffing machine and just give them a very light buffing. It just makes a very slick surface on them. And I don't do it to make them smooth. I do it to make them, I guess the word would be slippery. But the browning takes on them so much better for some reason. I think it's just because it is so smooth. And then when that browning, after they're all brown and all, they really become very water resistant. When you see the water, rain, or whatever hit those barrels, it just beads right off, even if there's not any oil on them. So in order to do that, I've got to strip everything off. So I've taken the swivel plate off. And I'm going to take the front half of the swivel plate off that is screwed to the barrels, so there'll be nothing in the way of the buffing pad. And it doesn't take me very long on the buffing wheel. I just go over it very, very quickly. I have a number of different buffing wheels and grinders and belt sanders on this little table here. And put it on wheels for the sake of getting a little extra room when I need it. I have them on both sides here, so it makes it very handy just to turn it and get it both angles, get it all the machines, and I have all of them on one table here. I put a little polishing compound on there. It's kind of a medium coarse. And it doesn't take very much. Very easy to hold the barrels on there when you get both barrels on one side. When you get to one, it's a little harder. And that's really as much as I do. Just that little bit makes the difference. And I just turn it over and I do the other side. Alright, we're going to put the sights on the barrels. And of course we have two sets of sights. Each barrel has its own sight, so there's no regulating of the two barrels to shoot with one set of sights. And one of the beauties of the swivel bridge, you can sight one set of barrels in for a certain distance and the other set of barrels in for another distance. There's a number of things you can do. But anyway, on the bottom, these very good castings. but they have a pouring sprue. That's where they pour the metal into the mold. So you've got to file that sprue off and clean the bottom and clean the two edges just slightly with a 3-cornered file, and the bottom, and that's, of course, that's the front sight, and then the rear sight is the same thing, but it has a much bigger chunk of metal there on the bottom to take off. So the way to get that off is to put it in your vise, and you know me by now, you want to get a good coarse file, and that'll come down in no time. Then when you get close to the bottom, you switch over, but for now we'll use this coarse file. Now we're almost down to where we're touching the flat there now, so we're going to switch files and take the fine file and finish it. And just take off the bump. Don't go any further, because you'll make it too small for the... Yeah. Now we've got just the dovetail. The bump is gone. And then the other thing we want to do is to just run the file in the dovetail. Just take your 3-cornered file and just do enough to polish that. There's a little bump on there from the seam in the mold. And that's what you want to take off. There it is. And that one's all done, ready to go on. After it's on the rifle, then we will take off these other marks. You can see the mold marks, the seam. The front sight is the same thing. Just put it in your vise and take your coarse file and go at it and take that right off. And I'm just starting to touch the flat part, so I'm going to switch files. I like to get those bottoms good and clean, because a lot of times when I'm building my own rifles, I actually I tin these before I put them in. I tin the slot, the dovetail slot, and then I drive these in and I hit it with the torch. Once I get the rifle sighted in, and I do all that, of course, before I brown it, and that's what I'm going to do with this rifle. And once I get it sighted in, so I know it's not going to move anymore, then I just hit it with the torch, and it melts the solder, and then I don't have to worry about the rifle falling over if it's against a tree and whacking the sight and getting, losing the sighting. So in order to do that, not only have to get the bottom, but the actual bottom of the blade, you want to get that cleaned off also, and at the same time clean the edge of the dovetail. And you don't want to take too much off of this, the bottom of that sight, because it's got to touch the barrel. But if you clean it and then just take a tiny little bit, you can see the shine on there. Take the corner off. That's just enough for the solder to stick on, to get up on the edge a little bit. And then you won't have any daylight underneath the front sight. So I'll tin the bottom of that, tin the top of the barrel, then drive that in, and then clean the solder off after that. It's a bit of a job to clean the solder off, get it off, but it just makes such a nice, neat, tight front sight. Some people like to leave them with the dovetail sticking out on both sides of the barrel, and that's very traditional, but I really don't care for that look. So it's up to you. It's your kit. You can put any sight on it you want. I also have two different sights that I use on these. They have the same base. One is wider than the other, and I'll try to remember to, when I talk to the people that I'm going to send these kits to, ask them which sight they would prefer. The older people, like myself, like even some of the younger people, like a wider sight for a hunting sight. It's easier to pick it up when it's late afternoon or just before dark. But some people like a real fine sight if they're going to do fine target shooting with it. The finer sight is the way to go. So we got the sights ready to put in the dovetails.